Welcome back. This is towards the end of our shading unit, and we're going to be working on our larger 9x12 drawing paper or printer paper today. You will need a ruler and a pencil, of course. And in your class file, there's a PDF you should have downloaded and printed for the elephant drawing. So we're just going to demonstrate the diamond grid now. On the source image, where it's just a contour line drawing, before we get into shading, you always want to have a nice contour line drawing of your subject matter done before you start shading. You'll notice there's not really a box all the way around this image. So whatever it is you're trying to enlarge, it can be helpful if you start with a nice box around the image. So we're just going to make one of those now. At the same time we're doing this, you will also need, since we're going to enlarge this image, we're going to times the length by 2 of it. So as we draw the box, part of the purpose here is to also measure the image itself. So this is 3 inches high and 5 inches long. So we're going to take 5 and we're going to times it by 2. So our drawing is going to be 10 inches long, and we're going to take, was it 3? Yes. We're going to take 3 and we're going to times it by 2. And our drawing is going to be 6 inches high. So it's going to fit just fine on our 9x12 drawing paper. And then we're going to start dividing the image. First we're just going to draw a diagonal from one corner to the other. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing along the other diagonal in the image. And now we have found that image's center with very little measuring. Now, for some of you, you're going to want to use your ruler and actually measure half of 5, which is 2.5 for this next step. And some of you are just going to be able to kind of eyeball a straight line. You want to draw a straight line up and down through the center of that X. And then you could measure and find the middle of 3, which is 1.5, or you could just kind of wing it. I usually just wing it, but for precision you can always measure. And then you're going to draw another straight line through the center of that image. I suppose measuring is good, since diamond grid is kind of about replicating an image and enlarging it, however large you want it to be. Now we're almost there. We're just going to finish out the diamond by actually finding the center of all the remaining boxes. So now I've essentially divided this image into 4 quadrants. It'll be much easier to study its negative space now that I've done so, and make a nice accurate contour line drawing. So I know that the eyeball is almost in the very center of quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 is mostly his backside. His tail is a little bit starting in it. We catch some ear, a little snip of his leg. His rear leg facing us lines up nicely with this. And then in the bottom of quadrant 4, there's quite a bit of negative space defined by his trunk and his leg and his tusk area. So then I just replicate this diamond grid on my paper to enlarge it. And I have my measurements, so I want something that's 10 inches in length and 6 inches in height. So I will just make a square now that is matching those. And you can do this with just about any image. I also teach portraiture, and I definitely my students use a diamond grid in their very first portrait assignment. If I was going to be particular about if I wanted this to really be a nice finished work of art, I would actually then come and erase this, or be working light enough that I could erase it in the end and totally get rid of the grid for a nice finished product. But since we're actually studying how these lines line up with the negative space in the elephant today, I will keep them sort of dark for the contour line aspect of this assignment. So really I just treat this sort of like target practice. I'm just studying where things come through. I have a series of triangles now that I'm working in, and this triangle is the same aspect ratio as this triangle, right? I've got kind of an equilateral triangle here. I think this is called an isosceles. I'm not sure, to be honest. But they are the same. So I kind of look and say, okay, his tusk, I like to start here with his tusk, and it kind of comes through this line about a fourth of the way through this line. So I just take this fourth and I say, okay, well, if I divided this into fourths, just sort of ished it, then his tusk should be coming through initially right about here. So I'm right here. And then I'm just going to kind of come up these nice contour lines in his trunk and get my drawing on here. Now I'm going to study this piece of negative space and make sure that it looks like this. It's just a larger version of this negative space before I move on. I don't want that shaded in my final. That's just sort of to help you see what's going on. And really I just work my way all the way around the perimeter of the elephant using this same technique. So now I'm looking at where, okay, his trunk comes through about halfway along this edge of this diamond, and so I'm lining up pretty good there so far. It's going to bunk out a little bit about halfway, and then just gently I'm looking at the angle of my pencil. It's just going to kind of angle back. So I'm just sort of tackling that one small bit of elephant there. And if you just really study the image small bit by bit, okay, so his head makes this sort of long L or J, lowercase l, I guess, and it comes through about a third of the way along this triangle's edge. So if I just sort of give myself a target to shoot for there, it kind of comes up and arcs, kind of flattens out, and ever so slightly arcs back up before exiting. I'm just cruising right along on this contour line drawing, and I'm happy whenever I'm drawing, and as I came up through here, you know, this earpiece just naturally married right into where it started before, so that really let me know I was on the right track. There's a few places on this drawing I really like to, I think are very good pieces of negative space to look at. One being this little shape right below the jaw there, has kind of this unique curve and a few angles, and so I always really like to just check in here and make sure that these are matching up. Did I leave a little snip of negative space along this center line? I did, and so when I teach this class in person, I just have my students bring up their contour line drawing, and I will just double check it off in a few random places before I say, great, good job, your grid is good to go, you can start shading, erase that grid. And so you're going to do that checking off for yourself when you're done. So we're almost done here, well, more than halfway. I'm just going to finish up this leg. It's nice because the feet kind of end right along the edge of this, and so that's a good, the edge is a good target. I always just try to like look at each angle and make sure that I'm replicating it. This is a great tool for beginning portraiture. A lot of beginning artists will try to draw a person and start with perhaps the most intriguing feature on the human face, which is the eye, and work their way out and realize there's some inaccuracies, or they didn't say room to finish the head, and you've put all this lovely work into this really beautiful eye study of the eye, and it's so shattering sometimes for an artist to have to erase all that because they didn't start with an accurate contour line drawing to begin with. So taking your time, and whatever your subject ends up being, beyond this elephant drawing that we're doing together, this is just an invaluable tool in the beginning of learning to draw, because it really makes sure that you're slowing down and you have something that is proportionately accurate before you really start to put all that energy into details like shading. And so I think it's really worth taking a few days on some things just to get a nice, you know, if I was doing a large portrait, I would take a few days for my contour line drawing. Just to, this is about a little less than third, this tail part, coming into that second triangle. I like that little snip of negative space. That looks right. And then I think these kind of arcing pieces can be fun. You want to come about a third of the way through there. Okay. Yay! All right. Oh, just this front part of the leg. Still need to finish up. That's a good little negative shape to study. Looks like I'm a little bit low. This should be coming through here. So I've made him a tiny bit plumper than he needs to be. But it illustrates my point. All right, now, before I erase the grid, I actually sometimes, so I like to work from this image so I don't get tempted to go into that shading that we were talking about. But before I erase this grid, sometimes I also like to kind of just quickly grid out this final image so that I can see where some of these big fun shadows are while I already have the grid on there. That might be the only one that really, well, other than down here. So just knowing that this shadow is so big, I just kind of like to map it out for myself to begin with. That it really does go all the way along this line. Well, that's kind of convenient when the drawing lines up like that. So now I can erase this grid and really start to identify these core shadows. I like to start with these maybe a 5 on the grayscale. Maybe not making them a 5 to begin with, but making sure I've laid them out. So why don't you erase your grid? Always erase the grid before you start shading, otherwise you'll get, you'll kind of mess up your shading and then you'll have to go back in. So